Okay, so now you've had an introduction to Gregorian chant. And this is one of the topics that's very difficult to deal with in the online course, I think, in the online part of the course. Communicating how this type of music was unpopular with the monks and nuns in the monasteries. Because I know when you listen to it for a minute or two at a time, it sounds meditative and peaceful and soothing and that kind of thing. But it's one thing to listen to it while you're relaxing or meditating or studying or resting or something. It's another thing to actually sit there in a chair and sing it for 6 hours a day. And, that's a different thing, all right. And I'm really not playing up how much the monks and nuns really did not like this music, because very quickly they moved to play within the rules and to make some adjustments. I mean, nobody likes singing the music this way, but part of being a monk, as you've learned by now, is that you take a vow of obedience to the abbot. And the abbot says you have to sing the prayers this way. Now, the abbot doesn't want to sing the prayers this way, but part of being an abbot is that you take a vow of obedience to the Pope, and the Pope says you need to sing the prayers this way. Why does the Pope say you need to sing the prayers this way? Because the Pope doesn't sing them for 6 hours a day. The Pope just walks around the Vatican doing Pope stuff until he passes by a chapel and listens for a few minutes and says, "Oh, isn't that Gregorian chant so peaceful and relaxing and meditative?" But it's a whole different thing when you're singing it for 6 hours a day. And it becomes worse, as you've learned by now, when Gregorian chant develops that technique called a melisma, the long syllable. You remember the example that I played for you. It took 17 seconds to sing two words of the prayer. There's a lot of empty space with all that stuff in the middle there. That's why it's unpopular. That's why it's so boring. There's nothing to think about. At least whatever that's about. Don't you love when computers just pop up windows at you? Anyway, you've got the long, boring parts in the middle where nothing's being said. At least in that earlier style of Gregorian chant, if you remember, you had one note for each word and you moved through a prayer. You had something constantly changing about. Something's got to give, okay? And something gives. The monks who are stuck singing these boring songs for 6 hours a day respond to the melismas by inventing something, what are called tropes. Tropes are extra words to place into the melisma. Extra words. And I'll give you some examples. Pretty quickly, we see in a response to this Gregorian chant, which is coming down through the church hierarchy, monks and nuns responding by playing within the rules but making some adjustments. For example, typically we see a pattern developing. We're in the first worship service for the day. The monks gather in the choir. They begin singing the service. And as they move through the service, when they hit different melismas in the service, then different monks have an opportunity to make their own prayers. I'll give you an example. Say they're singing the Kyrie, Lord have mercy. And they begin singing the Kyrie. They hit the first melisma, the first long syllable there where nothing's being said, nothing new is being said. They hit the first melisma, and monk number 1 gets to make his own prayer. So they're singing, Lord have mercy. They hit that in the middle where nothing's being said. They hit the first melisma, and monk number 1 says, Lord have mercy on our farmers and send us rain. And then it's back into the song, hit the second melisma, and monk number 2 says, Lord have mercy on our king and give him wisdom. And then it's back into the song, hit the third melisma, monk number 3 makes his own prayer, and so on. And you move through the chapel, and every monk has an opportunity to make their own prayer during the melismas. Well, you see what that does? It actually gives you something to think about during those long, boring, nice sounding, sure, but long and boring melismas. It provides for individual participation in the service. It builds community and all those kinds of things. And then typically in the worship service next to the lunchtime, the mealtime for the day, it's comedy hour down at the monastery. And as the service starts, monks line up, get in line, and as you hit the different melismas, everybody who wants to has a chance to make their own little one-liner joke. Or maybe make a pun. Monks and nuns, like I said, tend to be intellectual types, and they like word game jokes and puns and that kind of thing. It's a time to have a little bit of humor during the day. So it's a time to remind everybody of something funny that happened in the community, or to make a joke or something. It's a time to lighten up and have a little bit of humor, have a little bit of fun during the day. You know, typically when you see movies set in medieval monasteries, life is kind of boring and drab, and well, there's a lot of truth to that. And so it's a time to stop being serious for a little bit, and to lighten up a little bit. And then typically in the evening service, the service right before bedtime, it's time for a bedtime story. One of the monks has been given the job of coming up with a story to tell during the service. And there's a way of crafting the story to tell, okay, during the work part of the day. You see, one monk has been assigned the job to sit in the library and to come up with a story. And you already know what the service is going to be, okay? You already know what the songs are going to be. You know where the melismas are going to come. And so first of all, you come up with a story. It might be a remembered childhood story, like a Mother Goose kind of story. It might be a story from the Gospels or from the lives of the saints, people whose lives are held up as examples of moral behavior. Or it could just be a made-up story. It doesn't seem to much matter. But you come up with a story, and then you take your story and you cut your story up into small pieces. And then you move the story into the service. Excuse me. You hit the first melisma, you get the title of the story, you get back into the service. You hit the second melisma, you get the first line of the story, and if the story has to do with the songs and the prayers that are being sung, then that's a plus. And you weave the story into the service until at the end of the service, you hit the last melisma, you get the last line of the story, and then you close out the service. And the two things are woven together. And you get like a bedtime